Hi, everybody, and happy Friday afternoon. Welcome to Tremco CPG Live. Very excited to bring you part 2 of a segment that I've been working on with 2 great guest contributors. So welcome back, both Bob and John, to Tremco Live. Thanks for coming back.
Oh, I can't believe you're having us back. Thanks, Marcy.
Yeah, thanks for having us once again.
Yeah, John, we decided not to let John show his face this time around, so it's just Bob. But we're going to let John talk. So anyway, thanks guys. Had a good time with you guys last Friday afternoon. One of these Friday afternoons, we need to do these in person and then go out and, solve all the world's problems afterwards with a few beverages. I don't know about you guys, but week to week, I forget some things. So to kick us off this week, I thought we'd start off where you guys left off last week. And we left off kind of concluding with the great content you guys shared about why restoration. So Bob, why don't you kind of kick us off with kind of reminding us where we ended last week?
Sure, thanks, Marcy. So last week we went kind of into the details of what roof restoration is, the data that needs to be collected, and really the information that needs to be presented to a building owner or a design professional to make an educated decision, a business decision. So this slide kind of captures some of the more common reasons why restoration is usually a good fit for a lot of different projects. And as we discussed, it's not a fit for every single project, but it most certainly should be explored on virtually every single project because for the reasons you see there, whether it's sustainability and materials not being sent to landfills, leveraging the existing assets on a building, so all the costs, whether that be in the installed cost or the maintenance cost to maintain an asset, leaving that asset in place. You can see in there it does improve efficiencies, it's warrantable, and if you're cost conscientious, which I think most people are these days, it does cost less than a roof replacement project. So new reasons that we're going to explore today that you can see on the bottom there. We're going to talk a lot today about the material availability and what's going on in the roofing industry, and that also includes escalating costs as well as just the availability of materials.
Yeah. So lots of great reasons, and I know the first one there that we're going to touch on a little bit further is getting more useful life out of the roof. We talk about this a lot in the facade restoration too. What can we do to get more useful life out of those materials so that we're not sending it off to landfills? And I think this is a great intro to exactly what this slide talks about, is diverting that construction waste. John, why don't you tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, well, Bob touched upon last slide, sustainability, and there really is nothing more sustainable than keeping building envelope components working much longer, performing much longer than initially conceived, right? So through restoration, we're actually able to keep those components in place and doing quite well in lieu of removing them and taking them to the landfill or to the dump or what have you. And that's a wonderful message, wonderful narrative. What this slide really captures is how there's so much data involved with sustainability now that we can capture, and we know very precisely the impact of restoration or lack of impact, if you will, compared to replacement. Such things as carbon footprint, trees not cut down, all those kinds of metrics we can derive right out of one of these projects and put together a spreadsheet like this to help our design professional partners show their building owners the benefits of restoration, whether it's a facade or if it's a roof. We know these things and can demonstrate them precisely. So we've found this to be very effective in great many places.
Absolutely. I think if we go to the next slide here, having a technical issue. There we go. We're talking a little bit more about some of the things that have changed. So Bob, why don't you talk to us about that? What are some of the things that have changed?
Sure. Traditionally speaking, there's been 2 variables that really stand in the way of restoration in most cases. So those are, as you see on the screen, number 1 is the roof is too wet, meaning that there's too much wet insulation in the roof. For argument's sake, let's say that's more than 25%. That's usually a pretty decent rule of thumb. Number 2 is that the membrane system, and specifically when we talk about the membrane system being too weak, we're talking really about bituminous membranes. We know that most membranes do lose strength over time. bituminous membranes lose tensile strength over time. We know, we talked a little bit about this last time, the NDS 55 study that was done in the 70s really says once you get below 200 pounds of tensile, it's probably not worth bringing that roof back to life. So that from the very beginning of time, let's call it 1928 when Tremco began down this journey, those were like the two major obstacles. What's really changed is now there is a way, believe it or not, to dry out a roof. You can go beyond just cutting out the wet insulation, throwing it away and replacing it. You can actually dry out a roof. And trying to think of the best way to put this, I mean, it kind of explains it there, but this idea that when you do a resurfacing or a resaturant on a bituminous roof, like a built-up roof with gravel surfacing, you really are dependent in the past upon the performance of that membrane, which is why you do all that testing to make sure if it's worthy or not. These newer systems of today are less dependent on the performance of that membrane system. You still have to do your diligence in testing, but the threshold for performance has changed. And John, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, well, what it does, it allows us to address a wider spectrum of roofing candidates for restoration, which is all good news. And we're able to leave behind somewhat the performance criteria of the existing membrane because we're not using it as a substrate for performance, but rather just a substrate to build a new roof system upon. So it really, in my mind, kind of is the next generation of restoration solutions. And then we come back to that sustainability narrative, and we can keep even more of these systems working and have them in place so the performance continues on and on.
And I think this next slide here, which is titled Fluid Restoration 2.0, gets into just how that can be done.
Yeah, so
go ahead, Bob.
No, you first, John. Go ahead, please.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, I believe this is the slide showing the restoration system being placed upon a gravel surfaced roof.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sorry, I just had a little trouble seeing the slide on my computer today. This must be Friday. What you have here is the fluid applied system that's used for restoration is a very high build application. It's hundreds of mils thick in places if it needs to be, because we can go over a surface of a clean built up roof where it really looks like the surface of the moon with all kinds of undulations and everything else, and infill those essentially and create a smooth surface with proper slope to drain. And in that, we're able to restore these built-up roofs with a smooth surface solution. And then again, talk about the last slide we just discussed. This also helps the roof system restoration get a little bit of separation from that existing roof. So we're not so concerned about the performance of that existing built-up, other than having it have the capacity to hold the restoration system in place.
And I find it interesting. One of the comments there on this slide is about being virtually odorless. So I've got a lot of friends in the education world, and if something's going on and construction's going on, they're going to call me. And so this was a roof that was not one of ours, and they're like, "What's going on?" I can smell something, and so I talked to them about it. But I was also in a training event on this odorless system, virtually odorless system, with Marty Jakovic in DC, and I didn't even know he was putting it down in the room with me while I was presenting. So I think that's pretty interesting to know that there's that option when we're dealing with something like this. So if it is occupied space, it's going to be that it's not going to have that odor that people might know of in the past.
And that's a good point, Marcy. And I would just add to that and say, in the past, I think the expectation at some point was VOCs are bad. We need to have products that have less VOC. And that's fantastic. But now it's even beyond that, right? Because a product can smell and still not have VOC or a high level of VOC. So what we're talking about here, in a lot of cases, are bio-based materials that, are virtually odorless. And like you said, we've done and done seminars for design professionals in their office. We actually crack open the materials on the conference room table, and no complaints in the room at all. No weird odors, no VOC, nothing.
Well, I know a key part of what you guys were explaining that last week as well as this week is a key part of that restoration is making sure that it's restorable and dry. So talk to me about some of this innovation around roof drying.
Sure. So I guess this slide points to the fact that it's not a new concept, right? In fact, this white paper that was published, you can see there December 1st, 1981, by a very smart group of individuals. They basically explored the concept of drying out a roof. Now, most of us in roofing are familiar with what's called the self-drying roof concept. For those that aren't, I'll explain it quickly. The idea is that in most climates, including mine here in Chicago, and John's here as well, during the winter months, you have a migration of vapor into the roofing system, right? So essentially the insulation is getting wet, if you will. And then sometime in the early summer, the switch flips and the vapor drive goes back into the building, right? So most buildings that don't have high levels of humidity or weird things with temperature, they're able to self-dry throughout the year, right? Buildings that have high amounts of humidity and or high temperatures typically require the use of a vapor retarder or vapor barrier, right? So they started doing experiments with like, okay, are there other ways to dry out a roof? And some of us have been on roofs where we've seen these goofy little venting systems, and do they actually work? How much of an area do they dry out? So the engineers that were part of this study basically concluded that all these different methods of trying to dry out a roof really didn't work, right? You can install venting systems and special materials. It really didn't have a significant impact at all on the results. What did, believe it or not, is just taking a shop vac, sticking it in the insulation and turning it on. And you sit there and you think about it, and it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, I suppose, but how could you possibly scale that to make it meaningful? Like, what are you going to put 2,000 shop vacs up on a roof and turn them all on at the same time? You probably look like that thing from the Sandlot that they made to get the bulb out, right? So again, it's not a new concept, but previously no one's been able to really scale it in any meaningful solution.
Perfect segue to this next slide, where we're going to show just that, some video here, inlaid video that we're going to go ahead and play. And I know Bob's going to help us narrate it as it plays.
I'll give you my best Morgan Freeman voice. How about that?
Please do.
So this video is actually showcasing a technology that Tremco developed. We call it Rooftop 2.0, that basically takes that same concept of using a shop vac, but basically puts it on steroids. So what you're seeing right now is a manifold system with drying units being constructed on the roof in a grid-like pattern. And very shortly here, you're going to see, there it goes, that you're going to basically penetrate that area. You're going to put connections to it, including sensors. They're dropping in right now. And essentially, you're going to use those manifolds to put pressure inside the roof and suck out all that moisture. And this technology, again, it's somewhat dependent on the type of insulation there is in the roof deck, and we'll save the technical ins and outs of it, I think, for another presentation. But just know the fact that this study, again, that was done in the 80s, which concluded that there is ways to suck moisture out of insulation. In fact, you saw when they did it in the study, before the water was removed, the insulation had 21% drying ability. Afterwards, it had 83%. I think what's important to note about that is what we've discovered through doing all the drying that we have on roofs throughout the U.S. is that you can actually put the insulation back to the state that it was previously, believe it or not. We actually have samples that show, like, here's a piece of wood fiber board that was completely saturated, now it's dry. Here's an original virgin piece. Can you tell the difference? And most people will never be able to tell. That's how good the technology is.
That is part of when we bring people in for a tour, so we can we demonstrate this, and it's really interesting because we do hand out the samples, and some that has been dried and some that hasn't, been involved in that, and you have to look at the bottom to see which one's marked to know the difference. So it's definitely pretty interesting to be able to it means so much when you can put your hands on it and see that difference. I know some of the challenges that we're facing and that we talked about is obviously part of why we're speaking to everyone virtually, and hopefully we're getting this behind us, but obviously there's been some shortages, raw material and driver shortages. Bob, do you want to talk to us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. So for lack of a better phrase, it's kind of been the perfect storm. Like you're saying, Marcy, you have the COVID-19 pandemic and all that's come with the supply chain crisis on that side of things. You have raw material availability being a very serious issue. There were storms that hit Texas that, wiped out, not wiped out as in they're not there anymore, plants, but basically wiped out production at plants. And because those plants weren't able to shut down properly, they had a large period of time in which not only were they down, but they had to get back up and running again. So all this was kind of compounding in the background. And then you can see the graph there talks about the shortage of truck drivers. So all these spinning plates are kind of spinning simultaneously, and things started to kind of fall off. And one of the big things, at least in the roofing business, that's dropped off is the availability of polyiso insulation and some other insulations as well. So you have this scenario where in some cases, owners or design professionals are ready to proceed with roofing projects and the materials are nowhere to be found. Insulations, fasteners, specifically steel fasteners, in some cases, certain single-ply membranes, they just cannot be procured. And I mean, we're talking in some cases for up to 12 months. So it's created a real challenge, but it's also created an opportunity, I think, in that it kind of goes full circle back to well, why were you going down the path of replacement in the first place? Did you check off all these things that we talked about in the last Tremco Live broadcast? And John, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and it's all the great things we talk about restoration. Then the supply chain disruption has just reaffirmed what a great method it is, what a great tool and tool bag it is we have from a roof management standpoint. But it's it gives us this capability to continue to manage roofs. And the one thing we need to keep in mind, though, is that when we talk about roof restoration, it's really a full system warranted approach, so that when a roof is restored properly, you've done diagnostics and all that kind of thing to establish as a proper candidate. And then when the warranty is issued, it covers the restoration system as well as the existing insulation, membrane, blocking, and everything from the structural deck up. So in effect, a restored roof, when done properly, is as meaningful for the long term as a roof replacement. So I guess that's an important distinction to keep in mind for the design professionals out there who begin to entertain this, is make sure the folks you're partnering with do, in fact, issue a full system warranty.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because I know there has been questions in the past when I've done presentations with you, John, or other of your colleagues, where that distinction, people get confused about that specific distinction. So thanks for bringing that up, so that's very clear. I know we talked a little bit about this already in terms of availability. So I'm not sure if you guys if there's anything more you want to add here. This is the images of the MDI impacting the roofing industry, which you mentioned.
Yeah, those are kind of two of the more known raw materials that were in short supply. And just to show respect to every economic professor I've ever had, I threw that graph in there where when the supply curve shifts and goes from S1 to S2, guess what that means, everybody? A new higher price point is established.
You didn't know you would use that in your role, but you do. You do.
It's back.
I know the other thing we've talked a lot about too is just environmental challenges. Obviously, these environmental challenges have been part of the supply chain disruption as well. So talk to me a little bit about what we're looking at here.
John, you want to go?
Yeah, Bob,
And
have a
what
go. Yeah, I'm having trouble seeing this slide. Sorry.
I know. I was just going to tell you, John. We're looking at resiliency and the definition of it. The ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity or change.
Yeah.
We've got some great pictures of Nadura as a solution, and the tragic picture of Mexico Beach.
Yeah. It's really resiliency and durability is really what we're talking about here. Within all the things we talked about, and whether it's replacement or restoration, we really want to be mindful of long-term performance, right? And then oftentimes folks I work with and design professionals will maybe say, well, gosh, they've got this 20, 25-year warranty, but I think the proper methodology is to look at it from a standpoint of what we're actually specifying, the system, the product, how everything is going together from a standpoint of, is it going to last a long time, and is it indeed restorable at the end of its serviceable life? So that's when we begin to look at things like resiliency and durability as being almost like design criteria, if you will, of how to create the proper long-term solution.
I had a great event here in Cleveland this week where we talked a lot about insulated concrete forms and not only their durability and resiliency, but their great beginning force when you're building for net zero, which will be a whole nother broadcast, but I just thought I would throw that in there as we talk about resiliency, durability, and then there's amazing energy opportunities that can be achieved with building this way as well. This next slide, Bob, maybe you can comment a little bit more once again as we look at those environmental challenges and maybe the specific impacts related to hail and some testing we've done with hail.
Sure. So for those of you that aren't familiar with FM Global, they are an insurance provider. They provide insurance to a lot of the Fortune 1000 companies. What makes them unique in that they provide insurance, they require that their customers install roofing systems that are compliant with their testing. So most manufacturers go to Factory Mutual and they have their systems tested, right? So one of the things that FM has always tested for under test 4470 is hail resistance. And this map was redesigned a few years ago now. What's different about it now than in years past is that center zone, the dark pink. That's what they call a very severe hail zone, VSH. What it really means is that if you're a customer of FM Global within that area, your roof has to have been tested by them to withstand the force of very severe hail. I know this sounds crazy, but here it goes. The test for very severe hail is a solid 2-inch ice ball that is propelled at about 145, 150 feet per second at the roofing system. And when you put it in the test chamber, you're basically lining up a laser dot with either the fastener or the ribbon of adhesive. You blast the assembly, you take it out, dissect it, and you're looking to see basically if there's been any damage to the coverboard system and or the insulation system below. So these systems, I mean, again, it's hard to conceive it, I know, but a solid 2-inch ice ball going at, I think it comes out to over 100 miles an hour and just blasting off of that roof. And like you said, Marcy, if you come to Cleveland, you can see us do it.
Exactly. Well, that's definitely going to be part of future tours, but maybe we'll also have it be part of a future broadcast because it is pretty incredible to see that test, and obviously there's a reason for it, to make sure that we've got something that's going to be able to handle those environmental challenges. The next thing we're going to talk about is just, trying as we move forward with restoration. Obviously, we want to do the right thing for the right reasons. So this slide's going to talk to us a little bit about avoiding some common pitfalls. So, John, do you want to kind of kick us off, talking to us a little bit about some of those common pitfalls that we want to avoid?
Well, sure. And I think it comes back to proper diagnostics. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yep.
I think it comes back down to proper diagnostics. To avoid the pitfalls, you want to make sure that what you're restoring is need worthy of restoration, of course. And the diagnostics process will give you that answer readily. And really you want to work with manufacturers who are adhering to a diagnostic process as well. It's definitely the better long-term solution, because if you restore something that's not worthy of restoration, it really is a waste of time and money, obviously, but it can actually make the problems even worse and make the roof fail faster. So it's a diagnostic, established there's wet material in the roof, and all those kinds of things needs to be adhered to directly. And it's also why I say the restoration belongs to design professionals, because they really have a holistic sense of how buildings go together. Because other things besides roofing issues can cause roofing problems during the restoration process. Also, I would imagine the same, Marcy may can chime in, to the walls. What design professional understands how the entire building is working, so that they can avoid the pitfalls of bringing a wall system to a restoration solution when it really doesn't belong there. So it's really probably the first and most important thing about avoiding pitfalls.
Absolutely, yeah. Getting them involved, having that holistic approach, really understanding what the issues are, and then moving forward with the appropriate solution. Bob, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the warranties?
Sure. I think the point I always make, especially to design professionals, but building owners as well, is if you're curled up at night with your head on your pillow thinking your building is safe because you have a warranty, you were sold at some point, and you need to go back and rethink how you're doing things, because roof warranties, just like most warranties in general, if you think about where they are derived from, right, they're drafted by the manufacturer, and in majority of cases, the litigation team or the general counsel that works for the manufacturer, right? And you see on bullet point number 3, every warranty has exclusions on it, right? And we could most certainly have a healthy debate, and maybe, Marcy, again, another kind of future topic here about the ins and outs of warranties and why some are better than others, because there's a lot to talk about there. I'm just kind of generalizing it right now. The point is that a building owner is always better served by having someone assist them, whether it's a design professional or a consultant or somebody knowledgeable on the subject, about what is appropriate for their situation. And it's everything from the diagnostics that we've talked about to doing wind uplift calculations, testing. It's all that comes with that. That's how you pick the right system for a project. You don't just put them all on a spreadsheet and say, well, they all have 20-year warranties, so therefore they provide the same level of protection and they have the same pros and cons to them, because that's most certainly not the case. And the last thing I'll say, the advisory bulletin on the right, while it's dated, it still makes a very, very good point. If you think about how long buildings and roofs have been in existence, believe it or not, there was a significant amount of that time where there were no such things as warranties. They didn't exist. And this advisory kind of goes into like why that is. And it explains that there was a period of time where new roofing systems were coming into the US market, particularly single ply roofs, where they were just different types of systems. And the warranty turned into basically a marketing ploy. And it kind of just took off from there. So it's interesting to me when, again, we're talking with clients or we're trying to advise and someone says, give us a 20-year roof. Inevitably what they're saying is, give me a roof with a 20-year warranty. And it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah. That's another key part of the conversations we had this week at our event at the Test Wall, was about having somebody champion, whatever it may be, so that you're picking the right materials, systems for the project and the project needs, and just making sure that that's just iterated over and over again, so that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. I think there's some more here from Nibs from the Building Science series.
Yeah, and again, what's interesting to me is, like, you go back and you look at history, it's all there, and it's all in writing for the most part. And this having come out in the 70s, I think it was like 1977. You could see the quote on the screen right there. Nothing has changed. That's still the best foot forward, despite everything else going around us with warranties and new materials and stuff like that. it's right there. So I hope everyone takes a second there to just kind of read through those 2 or 3 sentences, because that is still like one of the best pieces of advice for a roofing system.
And then to wrap us up today, we've got a summary slide here that just talks a little bit further about, you know, what we talked about today and what's next.
John, did you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick us off, Bob. You can take us home. Yeah, it really comes down to, you know, what can we do with the building envelope that exceeds what we have been doing? How can we keep existing components and systems working so much longer than initially conceived? How can we get to a point of achieving durability and long-term performance through installation, initial installation?
Uh-oh, we're losing him. We'll let Bob finish us through.
Yeah, no, and John might come back online here, but there is.
And then restoration and maintenance, and perhaps restoration again, in lieu of. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I muted him. Go ahead, Bob.
Going to the bullpen.
Exactly.
No, I think what John was getting at is, again, tying this back to restoration. The paradigm shift that's happening now is those 2 challenges that we talked about: the roof is too wet and the roof is too weak. Simply put, there's solutions to address that now, right? Yeah. Diagnostic testing continues to get better and better and better, whether we talk about drones, mid-wave cameras, Troxler moisture sensors. There's all kinds of stuff happening to give us better and better and more accurate data. So it's all there. Like we saw in those 2 or 3 slides, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And anyone who's trying to complete a roofing project knows that. So you take the old school challenges and the new school challenges, and guess what? That's our working environment now. So you can either find ways to adapt to that, i.e. consider restoration, or you're kind of stuck in a rut. Right. So now is more a time than ever to kind of take a look at some of these things that are available. Number 5, like, it makes us wonder what's next, right? And we've come such a long way as an industry already. You see some project photos on the bottom there. The one that I really am partial to on the bottom right there, picture number 3, that was a ballasted single ply EPDM roof, 3,200 squares in a suburb of Chicago. The owner wanted to do something sustainable for their building. They wanted to go after some lead points for their restoration, their remodel. And essentially, we were able to take that roof, reuse, I think it was 98% of the existing insulation, the existing polyiso. More polyiso was added to it. A seamless, monolithic liquid system was put on top of a base ply. So that surface can now be restored indefinitely moving forward. So 20, 30 years from now, they'll scan it with diagnostic tools and just kiss coat it. And what's really cool is all that rock that you see. So think about this, like 3,200 squares of rock, like large river rock. What would you do with that? Like, you're going to put it in a landfill? And actually went to a local truck stop and they built like a huge parking lot out of it for truck drivers to park their rigs in.
Well, I'm glad you answered that, because that was one of the questions that was coming up for us, was what exactly happened to all of that. So this has been great. I know I've seen a lot of different case studies, on LinkedIn from a lot of the different Tremco roofing reps, lots of different opportunities for us to engage and tell those stories. So Bob and John, thank you so much for helping us tell our story. We talked a lot about a lot of different ways that we can come together on the building through these last couple of weeks. And as always, if you want to know more, all you need to do is email me, Marcy Tyler at mtyler@tremcoinc.com. If you want to be a part of the broadcast or part of the story, there's always that option. And I know Bob and John, I'd love to have you guys back again soon, where we can talk through even more opportunities like these case studies, roof drying testing, and of course, different ways that we can look at performance testing.
Would be happy to be back, Marcy. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And everybody, thanks so much for tuning in with us. Kicking off in March is a whole new look and a whole new name for Tremco CPG Live. It is now going to be something different, so you're not going to want to miss it. Join us next Friday as we take on this new endeavor, this new approach, and have a great weekend, everybody.